Hello and welcome to Arts 24. Across the United States, battles over freedom of expression are heating up, from book bans to cancelled performances and growing pressure on cultural institutions. Now artists across the country are pushing back. In a bold response, hundreds of theatres, museums, libraries and community spaces are joining forces for Fall of Freedom, a nationwide wave of performances, readings, installations and public gatherings this weekend. Organisers say it's an urgent call for the arts world to stand together against censorship and what they describe as authoritarian overreach from the Trump administration and its allies.
Fall of Freedom is a nationwide act
of creative resistance
to stand in solidarity against American fascism.
It's an open invitation to artists,
institutions, and communities everywhere
to take part in a weekend of exhibitions,
performances,
readings,
and public events on November 21st and 22nd.
Anywhere.
Anyone.
Together.
Well, two of the artists leading this cultural mobilisation join us now from New York, Pulitzer Prize winning playwright Lynn Nottage and visual artist Dred Scott. Hello to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Starting with you, Lynn. The list of names set to take part include filmmakers Michael Moore and Ava DuVernay, as well as musicians Amanda Palmer and John Legend, artist Marilyn Minter, and the author Jennifer Egan. For viewers discovering this for the very first time, can you explain a bit more what exactly is Fall of Freedom?
Sure. Fall of Freedom is really a response on the part of the artists to tactics of an authoritarian government to silence dissenting voices. If you look at what's been happening over the last 11 months, universities have been attacked and defunded, and books have been banned in libraries, and cultural institutions have been gutted, and arts grants have been canceled, and history redacted from the Kennedy Center to the Smithsonian to the National Public Radio, PBS. And we see that institutions are responding by shifting their programming and remaining silent. And Fall of Freedom was really a call to action and to artists and writers and filmmakers and musicians and theater makers, saying that we won't be silenced and that we won't be censored.
Now, Dred, you've described this as an urgent moment, that democracy is under attack, dissent is being criminalised, and cultural institutions are being pressured into silence. What specific warning signs, though, convinced you that artists need to mobilise publicly and they need to mobilise now?
Well, I mean, the warning signs are the combination of what's going on in arts and culture, but also more broadly. Our neighbors are being disappeared off the streets and kidnapped by masked men. Cities in the United States are being occupied by the military, which is just unprecedented in the United States and actually illegal. The rule of law is being gutted. And people, when they're being disappeared, for the crime of being born in a different country, they're being sent off to places that they've never been before and held in prisons in some place without any review legally. And so the efforts at censorship are actually to silence artists and not even talk about that. And when major artists like Amy Sherrill have to withdraw her shows from national museums like the Smithsonian Institution, it is actually both threatening and silencing to these institutions, but also to artists. And we thought it was urgently necessary to band together, to stand up. We saw universities trying to capitulate and make sort of deals with a fascist mob boss to try and save their own funding. And we thought that it was urgently necessary for artists to do what artists have always historically done, and that is to stand up, but also to use our voices and our art to illuminate what's going on, and to enable the arts community to say that we're going to stand together, as opposed to just trying to, as individuals, act, but we're actually going to bring forward museums and galleries and musicians and theaters to actually say that we're in this together and that we want to go to our audience, which we really believe is with us.
Now, Lynn, much of your work explores the social fracture shaping America. Your 2015 play, Sweat, is often called the first theatrical landmark of the Trump era. It captured the despair and anger in deindustrialized towns that helped fuel Trump's rise. When you look at what's happening in America today, do you see echoes of the world you dramatized in Sweat?
Yeah, I'm really, honestly not quite surprised. When I wrote Sweat, I immersed myself in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is a small town at the tail end of the Pennsylvania Rust Belt. And when I began interviewing people, about the economic downturn, I found that people were angry, that they were disaffected, and that the American narrative was very much being corrupted. And when people feel fearful, what they do is they begin to place blame. And I found that their fear and their despair was beginning to metastasize and become toxic in ways that were dangerous. And I think that it was really frightening to see just how these communities were, particularly the white communities, were beginning to scapegoat the black and brown communities rather than looking at the real culprits with the greedy corporations. It was easy for them to look at soft targets and people who are marginalized and not look entirely at the entirety of the ecosystem. And I think that we're seeing echoes of what was happening back then right now. I think that the groundwork for what we call the MAGA movement was being set 10, 15 years ago, and we're really living in the wake of what happened back then.
And Dred, you have spent your entire career confronting state power and testing the boundaries of free expression. Your 1989 installation, What is the Proper Way to Display a US Flag, sparked national outrage. For viewers who don't know the piece, can you describe what it looked like and what was the message behind it?
What is the proper way to display a U.S. flag is an artwork that is an installation for audience participation, meaning that unlike many kinds of artwork where the audience just looks at it, this is an artwork where people were supposed to actually interact with it. It consisted of a photo montage on the wall that had photographs of South Korean students burning American flags, holding signs that said "Yankee, go home, son of a bitch," and below that photograph was flags draping U.S. coffins coming back from the Vietnam War. There was text on it that says, "What is the proper way to display a U.S. flag?" And below that was a shelf that had a book or several books that people could write responses to that question. And below that was a 3x5 foot flag that people had the option and choice of standing on as they wrote their responses to the questions. It became the center of national controversy in 1989 when George Herbert Walker Bush was the president. And he specifically denounced the work and Congress outlawed it, but in part because all sorts of people were interacting with it and writing things like, "I'm a German girl. If we carried out our flag about the way you guys do, we would be called Nazis again. I think you have too much trouble about this flag." And so there was really insightful. It wasn't just about what I, the artist, thought. It was about what people who were seeing the work engaged with it, including people whose brother were killed by the police, who wrote about that and saying the police who killed her brother wore the flag, and that actually, not only killed her brother, but also that was done in the name of America is what this person was feeling. And so I've been thinking a lot about nationalism and national identity, and we're seeing this come back right now. One of the big questions that Trump and the MAGA movement have put before is, who is an American? And they're saying all these people that have come that are hardworking, they're trying to feed their families. Some of them came to the United States when they were children, and they're just being rounded up by masked men in hoods, ripped away from their jobs, ripped away from what they're doing. And they're saying these people are not Americans. And specifically, Trump is targeted, even saying the 14th Amendment, which was passed actually to enable and ensure and guarantee that people that were enslaved in this country at the end of the Civil War, that anybody born in the United States was a citizen. And he specifically said, well, we should overturn that, which is very dangerous. Different countries express citizenship in different ways, but in the United States, that's been a landmark and foundation of the United States. And they're trying to rewrite that to say people that are basically not white and not born here are not part of this country and should be, and they're criminals, much the way that Nazis in Germany actually were targeting the Jewish population.
Going back to the flag again, George Bush called your work disgraceful. You responded by burning a flag on the steps of the Capitol, a protest that led to a landmark Supreme Court decision affirming your constitutional right to burn the American flag. That was 1989. This August, President Trump issued an executive order against flag burning. You weren't afraid of government retaliation then. Does this era feel different?
Yes, this era is different. When the president of the United States basically says, "I don't care about the laws," the flag burning that happened in 1989 went to the Supreme Court, and it sort of said that flag burning and any use of the American flag, whether it's to fly it on a pole or use it in artwork or burn it, that is protected speech. It's speech that's protected by the First Amendment, which is very foundational to the United States. And the Supreme Court, including conservative justices, says that was protected speech. And Trump is trying to sign an executive order which doesn't actually just rewrite rewrite constitutional law, but he's telling the Justice Department to ignore what is law and precedent, and they're going to try and overturn that. And I think in this era, I don't think that this Supreme Court would actually interpret the law the way the previous Supreme Court did. But as far as fear, the point that they're doing is they're trying to instill fear into people, and it is a terrifying time when the government says we don't care about law, we don't care about precedent, we just have state power and we have guns. And so it is frightening, but it is also something that people need to be courageous and stand up to, which is part of why in Fall of Freedom we are saying, courage is contagious. We think that the fear that they're trying to instill into people is trying to silence people and isolate us. And we think that if people are courageous in standing up, much the way I did in 1989, it will bring forward lots of other people to see that these people are just emperors without clothing, and we can actually, celebrate the freedom that we have fought for to have.
Lynn, just one final question because we're out of time. You've said that expression is the action and courage is contagious. In a moment when political institutions seem unable or unwilling to protect democratic norms, what can art do that politics can't?
I think that one of the things that's really beautiful about this moment, and if you go to the Fall of Freedom website, that there's a glorious range of happenings across the country, and it's a tribute to the artists' ingenuity and imaginations. There's sing-alongs, readings, and book bands, and creative workshops, and art exhibitions, and cabarets, and image mapping. And I think that what art can do is really tell our story, because right now I feel that the federal government is asserting a very specific kind of narrative that's only showing one point of view. And they say that they're championing free speech, while at the same time they're going out of their way to ban books and censor our history and defund our universities. What I think art can do is sort of correct the narrative. It can sort of embrace the full diversity of who we are as Americans. And I think that that's an incredibly beautiful thing. And that's why art is necessary, is that we need our storytellers, particularly in moments like this, when they're trying to co-opt and corrupt and disappear our stories.
Okay. Lynn Nottage and Dred Scott, thank you so much for joining us from New York. It's been a pleasure to have you on the programme. Fall of Freedom takes place in the United States on November the 21st and 22nd. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.